All right. Parrot TV.
Okay.
Voice for Humanity.
Hi, I am Dustin Pickering. Welcome to the New York Parrot Literary Corner. Today we have Kat Charissage, who is a poet, writer, and visual artist, also a contemplative educator and counselor. She uses both poetry and art for self-exploration, as well as a therapeutic tool. She hosts art-based groups in many areas, such as poetry, depth dimension practices, and freeing our self-expression, and works individually with people wanting to access their deepest selves. She's been writing poetry since a teenager, but until about 8 years ago, she either hid or destroyed most of it. Since she is committed to self-expression rather than perfection, now poetry has bloomed in her life. Kat lives with her spouse and son on Blackfoot territory in Lethbridge, Alberta, and collaborates with others in bringing open mic poetry to the city and teaching others to write and enjoy all kinds of poetry. She is the author of Open to Mystery, a chapbook of paintings and poetry. Thanks for joining us today, Kat. How is your day going?
My day's going really well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, quite welcome. I look forward to the discussion. And my first question, it's interesting that you say in your bio that about 8 years ago you decided not to destroy or hide your poetry. And one of my opening questions, I was thinking of that, and I was wondering, what was there a spark, a moment where you just suddenly realized maybe I should keep my stuff, or what was causing you to think that maybe it wasn't worthwhile to keep?
Well, I had thought it wasn't worth keeping because I was raised to be a physician and to be a scientist and to be someone who is very much part of the capitalistic world. And my life hasn't turned out that way. I've ended up working in social services, and I've been, and also in artistic pursuits. So, but my poetry, I never considered it to be anywhere near the quality of the poets that I loved. So it would be, sitting in a back binder somewhere. And then when I was starting to do my story circle, when we moved to Lethbridge here, I started to do my small circles with groups of women on different topics. And because my whole attitude in these circles was to have a mixture of writing and talking, like journal writing and talking, reading our stuff to each other, it started to occur to me that I was not only valuing what they had to say, no matter if it came in a beautiful package or not, but I was all about trying to encourage my people to express themselves, to say what life looks like from where they were standing. And I thought, wait a minute, that's what I've been doing. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm a person too. I'm worthy of all of the attention and respect that I'm giving to the others here. And so that's when I started uh, keeping my writing and started talking to people about poetry and started doing groups on poetry as well.
That's an interesting. Do you find that when you're around people that are more kindred spirits, that it's a lot easier to communicate through poetry?
Yeah, yes, I do. Although we've had tremendous reception, like really kind reception from people who say things like, well, I've never read poetry before, but this is the poetry that I kind of like. I can understand it. Um, I find that sometimes there gets to be well, I find that sometimes there can be a competitiveness or an arrogance among certain kinds of poets or groups, just because there aren't that as many venues to speak it and to write it, and certainly not to make any money from it.
Mhm.
So, but for the what I would call the ordinary poets, we get along famously.
So there's a competitiveness among sort of the highbrow poets, the academic crowd, you think?
Yeah, that's what it is. There are only a certain number of venues for getting published, and then also in terms of like academic poetry, or the more, I guess we would call it highbrow kind of poetry. It almost it's almost a competition into who can't be understood the most. You know, the and so, you know, and I never enjoyed that kind of poetry, and that's partially why I didn't value my own. And yet I'm finding that there really is room for all sorts.
So your upcoming nonfiction book, it's interesting, the premise about how living a reflective life is a political act. And can you explore that a little bit for us?
Oh, I sure can. Um, yes, my tentative title is Mysteries, um, Making Meaning, Making Soul. And the subtitle is Living a Reflective Life as a Political Act. And what I mean by that is that most of us are just working so hard and are so frantic in all of the things that we're doing every day. Uh, our jobs are asking more of us in less time. If we have children, if we have a spouse, if we have a social life or an extra passion, there is no time to do this. Almost all of us are running on sleep deprivation, and all that does is make worker bees. It doesn't make human beings. Whereas I'm proposing, I mean, what I'm proposing is a very ancient idea, but what I'm proposing is that even in this day in North America, taking 20 minutes a day, finding 20 minutes, maybe it's um, after you leave work every day, you go to a coffee shop or you sit in your car with your thermos of coffee and you have 20 minutes just to either write in your journal or write a poem or enjoy the budding blossom of the crabapple tree right where you are. To spend 20 minutes every day, at least 20 minutes every day, in exploring what's going on inside of you. How did you feel when so and so questioned you during that meeting? Working it through so that then we get to really know what our own ideas, what our own beliefs are. And then if we know that, then we can choose to live like that. And it turns into a political act because if you think about those things, you may vote differently. If you think about those things, you might have different friends. If you think about those kinds of things, you might end up volunteering to be on a neighborhood board in order to make a park at the end of the street. If you think about those things, then you become free to take whatever your energies are and say, listen, I never wanted to work for an arms manufacturer anyway. Let me start a new business with my buddies and let's make it happen. So
Right.
I think that living a reflective life is extremely empowering.
It's interesting. And did you have a personal moment when you came to that principle? It's almost counterintuitive in a way, but it's almost common sense at the same time. But was there a moment in your life when you looked at your own thoughts and thought, this is interesting. I think I should develop this.
Yes, I've always been someone who liked to read. When I was in high school, I used to say I like to read quiet books at night. And what I meant by quiet books were uh, like the kind of books that they have now that are, 365 reflections from um, Stephen Covey, or, little books of meditations and thought-provoking kinds of things. I used to do that all through high school. It calmed me down. It helped me get into the zone to go to sleep. And then once I left my family of origin, I felt much freer than to write a journal. And it became really important because it let me say all of the things in my journal that I didn't dare say to other people. I used to put in the beginning of all of my journals, listen, this is a private journal. I express my feelings in here. You are not to be reading this. If you do, you deserve everything that you hear in this journal. Because I would yell and, you know, gripe about things. Um, but I began to really value that if I had time to reflect like that, then as I got older, I had other tools for that. But as I began to reflect like that, I knew that the stances that I took were much more realistic. Let me give an example. I worked at a sexual assault center for several years. I ended up actually as the executive director. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a time of, well, as any of the years in the last 40 years, it was a time of great activism around. At that time, the public just thought that the only person you had to worry about in terms of sexual assault was the stranger at dark in the middle of the night in a parking garage or something like that. But what we were hearing in real life was that no, it was the uncle who always came at Christmas time and Thanksgiving. It was the ex-boyfriend who wouldn't let go. So we were finding a very different thing. Some of my colleagues and some of the women that I really respected were very well, we were all very angry about this, but there was a lot of yelling at the police, a lot of, we didn't call it cancel culture then, but it was cancel culture. And it was like, and I was maybe not, I was sort of seen as somebody who was soft on the police, but because I didn't yell at them, I didn't write them embarrassing letters to the editor of the newspaper or anything. Instead, if there was an incident that was questionable, and there were, I'd pick up the phone. I'd say, "Hey, can we have a meeting about this? Because I think that there's some things that you need to understand that maybe you don't know about, or maybe you haven't heard about this." And I ended up, I feel, doing a better job for the actual women who were seeking help from police or social services by being willing to talk and to educate and to listen to what their concerns were, what their problems were. And yet some of the other feminists, and I'm definitely a feminist, but some of the other feminists thought that the way to do action was to yell at the police and to embarrass them publicly, to call them out constantly. The reason I did things the way I did was because I took the time to sit there and work through my anger, because there was a lot of it, work through the anger and then ask the question, what's the most effective way to make change here? Like, they're a human being just like me. They want to do their job well, or at least to be seen to be do their job well, just like I do. How do I work with that? And I began to see that the people who were the most angry, and uh, this is a workplace scenario hazard for every activist, is that they're working so hard so quickly, the needs are so great that they don't take that time to step back.
Mhm. It's definitely, I think, much more positive to be interactive rather than confrontational. But as you say, people in those situations, they're loaded. Their minds are already occupied in a lot of other things, and they're not thoroughly thinking it through. I think even like writing styles, writing stuff out, journaling as you speak of, could help people like that. So how do you find that have you tried when you talk about going into like, you know, deep psychology and things like that? Is that something that you find that it's very effective for people to unload on the paper rather than to another person who may want to help, but the confrontation actually conflicts things up, kind of mixes things up and makes it harder to communicate?
Yeah, I find that to be really so. If I was going into these kinds of meetings that would spark anger, would trigger all of us, I always had a meeting with whoever my allies were before we would go in, and I would
Hmm.
talk about, well, what do you think might happen if they say such and such, and I would say something very outlandish. How would you reply, so that I could get out of them all of that reaction and anger, and then my saying, well, wait a minute, if you say that, what do you think they're going to say? And that's going to, we're not going to be able, they won't hear anything else you have to say for the whole meeting. So I would try to do that, and I would suggest that they write it all out in their journals ahead of time. But people are busy, people don't take the time to do that. And so I would do it verbally with them when I was in a meeting, but I would always say, listen, it's always a good idea to write this out first. Let me go to Martin Luther King Jr. for a
Mhm.
minute. He wrote a letter from the Birmingham
Right.
jail, and he had several points in it that were really excellent. And I think that because that several movements in the last 10 or 15 years have not actually been lastingly successful, say like the Occupy movements, haven't been lastingly successful because they did not follow through on this. So one of them is to find the people when you're trying to make change. Find the people who make the decisions, who can do something. Just talking to another group of activists or talking to, some banker that doesn't have any decision-making ability doesn't necessarily help, although all education does help. But find out who you need to talk to, and then always examine yourself before you go into the meeting. And that was something that really, really struck me. So, and that means that you're going to treat your so-called enemy, the person who thinks the opposite of you, that you treat that so-called enemy with as much respect as you want for yourself. You don't have to like them. You don't have
Hmm.
to agree with them, but you have to treat them with respect. Now, doing that is very difficult
It's very
when
difficult. Yes.
you know that they've been responsible for some horrible atrocity that you know of. But
Mhm.
you have to keep remembering, why am I here? I'm not here just to yell at somebody. I'm not here to express my anger. I'm here to try to make some change happen.
Right.
And then ask for things that are possible. I can't ask the chief of police to eradicate violence against women,
Hmm.
but I can ask them to ask these questions first. Don't automatically put it in a pile of, we can't get enough evidence, so we're going to say that it didn't happen. Change your wording so that you can say, we don't have enough evidence to bring this to a court of law, rather than unfounded. Unfounded makes it seem like you're just not believing the person. Um, and so, yeah, so Martin Luther King asking for what's possible to be changed. But it takes a lot. It's really hard. I have to admit, it's really hard.
Yes, it is very difficult work, and I'm very grateful for what you're doing and how you're approaching it. It needs to be done. So, would you like to share a poem with us?
I sure would. I would like to read one of my favorite ones. It's called Faith or
Okay.
Weed or Weeds. It's got two titles. Um, I have to let you know ahead of time, almost all of my poetry has elements of the transcendent in them. And I
Mhm.
use that word transcendent because for me, the transcendent is right here, right now, very
Mhm.
intimate with it. It's like we live much more than we just see in front of us. And I guess some people would say I'm spiritual without being religious, but here I am. Okay,
Mhm.
faith. I believe in weeds. Weeds? I know, heresy. But really look at them. No matter how you cut them down, dig them up, or try to kill them, you still get weeds. You gotta love that tenacity, that resilience. I know I do. Take crabgrass, hated by homeowners everywhere. Well, I'll take it. It's first up in the spring, first up after a mowing, so bright green and luscious, screaming, "Here I am!" Or the chickweed growing in the cracks of my driveway. Little green leaves like a natural carpet. Drive-in food. I pull into my driveway, lean over, pick my salad greens for the dinner. Even the price is right. It was a long winter this year. It was hard to believe that spring would ever return. But finally, Mother Earth resurrected. And right after the grass came up green, we had dandelions. I love dandelions. You can eat their leaves and their flowers, and their roots can cure just about anything that ails you. They're the first bouquet given by little boys to grateful mothers. They're bright yellow, smiling out from the green grass. When my boy was little, I showed him how to blow the seeds as we ambled down the sidewalk so that everyone could have such beautiful dandelions right in their front yards. Well, I didn't really do that. but I sure wanted to. Mother Earth, carrier of the life-death life cycle, you did it again this year. May I learn from your ways and rise again and again and again when I'm cut down by this world. Our Lady of the Resurrections, I have faith that you bring, even after the longest winter, life. I've seen it. Our Lady of the Resurrections, I believe in weeds. That's it.
That's interesting. And when you say weeds, I'm thinking of sort of my approach to grackles. It is like really kind of ugly birds that are local.
Oh,
And yeah, and I think of weeds, and I think of when I see a grackle, I'm like, that's an unappreciated bird, but that's a resilient bird that, it's not very attractive. It has a strange look. It maybe a little dirty. My aunt calls them flying rats.
yeah, yeah.
So, and I'm thinking, weeds are like the same way, they're not appreciated, but you make a point about it. They just keep coming back, and you make an excellent metaphor of that about resilience and in your own self, and so, about how you're facing, when you face getting cut down, you continue to grow, that's an excellent metaphor that you drew from nature. So that's definitely a poem, even if it's not obscure and high-minded or whatever you want to call it. It's
Well,
excellent.
that's it. Um, I think and when you were talking to another poet, Terry Petz, who's a friend of mine, that she and I, well, she did almost all of the legwork. She and I put together an open mic poetry in our city
Okay.
that it's on Zoom right now, but it was really good. It was really fantastic. And our 1 year anniversary, I wrote a poem in honor of all the poets who got up there. We had a tremendous number of people who were first time performers of their poetry. And we had the attitude, which is my attitude, that poetry is not something for particularly talented people. Lots of people now say, oh, wow, there's must be something in the water in Lethbridge because there's a lot of really good poets there. And I want to say, no, not really. Almost all human beings are capable of this kind of stuff if they take the time to do it and if they have a place where it is received with respect. So Terry and I said that our first response would always be clap like, it was the best thing you ever heard in the world. And even if, like, in terms of poetry, it might never be publishable, but we wanted a place where it could be received. And, they'd come back the third or fourth time and they'd be really good poets. Let me read what I wrote for them.
Okay, sure.
It's called Soul Lights Dancing. On the occasion of Owl Poetry's first anniversary, I see a roomful of soul lights dancing, moving together, then apart. The colors of the lights shifting, then blending, then merging. Some intense, some gentle pastels. Joy is visible. Hope is the air we breathe. These are making the soul lights vibrate. Such beauty, all of us together. This beauty is possible together. We speak in such different ways, out of different generations, different lives, different beliefs. We sing or croak out different stories. Yet way deeper than the words we understand each other. It's not that the words that bring us together, but the promise of speaking, the possibility of deep acceptance, of being seen. And we do. The beauty soul lights dancing together.
Excellent. What another natural image comes to mind for me when you talk about the soul lights dancing, I think of fireflies and the way they communicate. That's what I thought of, just listening to the poem. And of course, people, they communicate in their own ways, sometimes secretive ways and hidden ways that other people don't understand. And poetry is definitely something that brings people together. And I like that you encourage that amongst just any person who wants to come out and read something, and you, like you said, clap like it's never, ever been heard before. It's very encouraging, and I appreciate that you're doing that. And then it's funny that I was going to ask another question. You have a kind of conversational style where it's almost like when you read your poetry, some of it anyway, there's like you almost like expect a reflective response from the reader. One of the poems I noticed that is Dream Come True, where I think if it was at the end where you have a sort of moment where the readers kind of ask questions and sort of thought. I mean, how did you develop a sort of that conversational style? And I think you in part answered that, but I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. Why don't I read the poem first and then I'll answer
Okay.
the question.
Okay.
Dream Come True. Last night, I dreamt that as I got ready to go to bed, I looked out the window. I saw the most astonishing flash of lightning. Silent. The stark white against the dark night. It was like an upside down tree with dozens of branches, or a river seen from the top of a mountain with all the creeks and tributaries shining out. It was a flash of wonder in ordinary old Lethbridge. But dear spouse, still seated in the only chair in the whole house that he's comfortable in, he saw none of it. Didn't even register the flash. He was looking in another direction and missed it all. That explains a lot, actually. Every day, looking in different directions, we see different things. We are affected in different ways. No wonder we disagree. We walk towards different things and live in different worlds. Having seen wonder, I find it over and over again, even in ordinary old Lethbridge. But he didn't see it and doesn't find it. One of us looks into a computer screen, the other looks out into the world. What worlds do we find? In what direction are you looking? So yeah, I end with a question because part of the reason I wrote that poem was to say that, well, it comes back to the activism idea. If the only thing that we're seeing and listening are all of the atrocities in the world, and yes, there are many of them. In fact, sometimes I wonder if there is a God, and if God knows everything that's going on, if God doesn't fall into despair because of so much. But where do we get energy to make the changes when it's all huge and awful? And this is what my spouse is looking at. He's very interested in international affairs and conspiracy kinds of things going on, and how to make democracy work and all of that. But he's just pulled down by it all. Somewhere he has to find the strength to make something happen. And that's what I say. Find places where something is happening that you can love and agree with, and look at it and learn from it, and then do it.
Right.
So I want to ask all of the listeners who read my poetry to say, for them to like look at all of this, and then for them to ask themselves, hey, might that work for me? What if I tried that? And that's what I'm trying to do in the book, is to say, listen, journal writing isn't the only thing. What about taking watercolors and just swooshing watercolors across a page? Doesn't that color of green look gorgeous? Anything that lifts your spirit, so that then you can take that spirit out and create a more beautiful world.
Do you have a publisher plan for the book, or you're still in the process of writing it, if I understand correctly? Did anybody agree to publish, or are you self-publishing, or how is that going to take place?
Okay, that's all in the unknown right now. I promised myself that I wanted to get a first draft done before I started worrying about that. And because every time I read about trying to get published, it was a horror story.
Hmm.
It was, if you don't already have an agent, no publisher's going to look at you. If you don't already have 10,000 followers on your Facebook page, no publisher's going to look for you. Well, I don't have 10,000,
Right.
and but yet I also did feel like I've lived an interesting life. I have something to say. And like my words aren't going to be for everybody, but there's a few hundred people at least who would like to read my book. I know. When I think of self-publishing, I'm not a marketer.
Hmm.
My skills are not in that area, and I don't want to do that either. Um, so I don't know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write the best damn book that I can,
Hmm.
and then I'm going to go. I have been looking at. I'm a great reader. If you haven't seen all the
Hmm.
books
I
there,
see him.
they're all on the other side of the room too, and in every other room of the
Right.
house.
Same here.
Um, I've been looking. I've been looking for publishers who do publish the kinds of things that I would be writing, and I'm going. The next thing I'm going to do after I write the best book I can is figure out how to write a book proposal, and start with that. So if you know any good
I was gonna
publishers,
say
let
I
me know.
actually have a publishing house myself, and ironically it's called Transcendent Zero Press, which kind of may fit the mission there. Of it's part of what I'm trying to do with it is have self conversations and conversations that transcend the madness out there, and also confront the madness out there as well. So that's what a lot of the poetry I've published. I've mostly published poetry, but I've also done some fiction and some other stuff. So if you want to take a look at our website, I can send that to you and give you an idea of what we do at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Please do. We'll keep
Yeah,
in touch.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a small publishing house. It's not a glorious thing,
Yeah,
but it's a small seeds make great trees, so
that's right. That's right.
we have a remaining, about 4 minutes or so if you want to, impart some words of wisdom to the community out there at large that's listening in. And
I want to read what I call an angry poem.
okay,
I'm going
angry.
to read one of the nights when I was really frustrated and angry about racism.
Hmm.
This is called To the Old Guard, or Anti-Racism Action 202. Okay. Do not mistake my silence today for agreement. Do not assume I'm in your camp, you self-satisfied snool. You who still benefits, whose whole family for generations has still benefited from other people's blood, sweat, and death, death, death. I'm watching. I'm thinking. I'm planning and I am plotting. I am teaching, both underground and in the streets. And we are strategizing. We are listening. We are gathering our supplies. We are gathering our allies and all our resources. You'll probably never even know it hit you. You'll soon be outdated, gotten around, replaced, when no one listens to your speeches anymore, when no one asks you for your opinions anymore, and no one tolerates your antiquated hatred anymore. 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 You will die sometime. Prepare to meet thy Maker and atone for all thy sins. Meanwhile, I hear our new world's a coming. Get out of the way. That's it.
Excellent. That's a good advice to impart is people out there, we're building a world and we're trying very hard. If you're not willing to address these concerns, just get out of the way.
That's it.
Yeah, just don't be interfering with the movement for betterment, for human betterment in general. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're conservative, liberal, whatever it is. There's pettiness on all sides of everything. So
And there are
just
allies.
stay out of the way.
Yeah. And there are
Yes, yeah,
allies on both
definitely.
sides.
Yes, and yeah, definitely people that agree, that racism and pointless hate and systematic violence is not a good thing. I mean, that's common sense if you ask me.
Duh.
So
Yeah.
So if you have any shout outs, anybody you want to thank, we have a remaining minute or so before closing the show.
Well, I want to thank my friend Terry Petz, not only for all of her hard work for what she's done here in Lethbridge, but for telling me that I better contact you and let you know that I'm a
Absolutely.
poet. I also want to give a shout out to both my husband and my son. My spouse, we've been together for many years, like 40 some, and we've had our problems, but there's always been a support of anything that has really been really important to me. He's been supportive, and my son is the same way. He doesn't particularly like my poetry, but he thinks it's neat that his mom is a poet, so that's cool.
That is very cool.
And the last thing I want to say is I want to thank all of the people who take a deep breath and for the first time read their poetry in public.
Takes a lot of guts and bravery. And so if you're one of those people out there who's brave, contact us at the New York Parrot. We want to talk with you. We want to have a good discussion about your work, your ambitions, everything you have to promise the world. Just remember that it's all about human potential and growth. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be great. You can be just you. And that's a big point that I'd like to make. And thank you again, Kat, for joining us today and talking with us about the very important things that we need to hear about. And it's been an excellent conversation. And this has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. And I'm Dustin Pickering. Subscribe to our channel. We're looking for 1 million subscribers. They're challenging ourselves to have as many subscribers as we can gather. And if you would like to donate, it's paypal.me/nyparrot. Thank you very much for joining us again, Kat, and thanks to our viewers for keeping up with us. Please subscribe and comment. Tell us what you think. Regardless, we want to have a conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.